Everyone, welcome. As I kind of mentioned, for those who are kind of live in the Zoom audience, introduce yourselves in the chat, and you can just kind of put your name, if you want, your LinkedIn, if you want to kind of grow your community on LinkedIn. And then for the folks who are kind of on live stream, either on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, we want you in the conversation as well. So in the comments, whatever platform you're on, introduce yourself. So your name, what city you're coming from, and we want you participating this. So ask questions in the comments or in the chat, and we want you to kind of really engaging in the dialogue. So the focus for today, Let's Talk, is on helping leaders actually listen with Stephen Schadletsky. So excited to have him. We got a Canadian in the house. For those new to Community of Seven, there's one singular purpose of these Let's Talk calls, and it's to create an environment where you can come authentically as you are, where you're accepted, and where you can have conversations with other purpose-led leaders to talk about what matters most to you. For those in the live Zoom audience, if you can, please turn on your video because we want you in the conversation. We want to see your beautiful faces. For those on the live stream, we want you a part of the conversation. So comment, ask questions in the chats, and I'll be checking it throughout the event. So quick exercise. For those who are regulars, you know what to do. Top right-hand side, put this in gallery mode. So you should just see, it's kind of like we're the Brady Bunch, right? We always start these calls with a series of questions. So you're gonna raise your hand, both hands like this if the answer is yes, okay? If you're on live stream on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, etc., you can just type in yes or no in the comment section. So raise both hands if you agree. How many of you have ever had a boss or manager that led by fear? Okay, that's like almost everyone. How many of you have ever left companies or organizations due to toxic culture? So once again, if you're raising your hand, it doesn't mean that you're in it now. So just to clarify, how many of you have worked in organizations where you didn't feel your voice was heard? Okay. How many feel that communication skills is crucial and fundamental to good leadership? How many feel that COVID and the movement to work from home and Zoom has made listening even more crucial to leadership success? And last question, how many of you want to learn to be a better listener and leader? Okay, love that, all of you guys. Super. So you can put it now back to speaker mode. So you should probably just see me right now. Hi, everyone. I got fancy and I wore a suit for Shed because I'm trying to, impress him. So today's talk is on helping leaders actually listen with Stephen Schadletsky. I'm going to call him Shed just for short. And I'm going to start this call with a quote from Tim McClure, because I've seen it, you've probably seen it floating on LinkedIn, but I've always found it really powerful. And it's this: the biggest concern for any organization should be when the most passionate people become quiet. And I know in my 20, 30 plus years in corporate America, I've been that person who has been quiet. Especially when leadership has gotten toxic. And for me personally, the only remediation was to either A, if the boss left, or B, if I left the organization. So I'm really excited to kind of have this conversation to kind of see if, we can do some introspection and to say if maybe, as leaders, are we those, creating a culture that is psychologically safe for our employees and our workers. And today's call is really about the importance of listening, and our guest, Shed, is going to go over how we as leaders can really work on listening down, and he's going to talk more about this whole concept of listening down. But at its core, listening is a really core communication skill, right? It's fundamental for effective leadership. It's necessary. And in this rapidly approaching post-COVID world, the whole notion of active listening, empathy, emotional intelligence has gotten even more important, right? If you look at this whole great resignation, or as Mita says, the great enlightening, people are leaving jobs in droves because they don't feel like they have a voice in their companies, right? That their voice doesn't matter, that they're not finding purpose in their companies. And so it's really imperative that we as leaders really kind of step back and really dig deep into this concept. And there's many reasons why listening skills are important. I'm going to really quickly give you 5 reasons that it makes you an effective leader before we introduce Shed. 1, listening increases your capacity as a leader. We can always learn from those around us, even our direct reports, even millennials, or, you know, the next gen, right? Straight out of college. You know, by actively listening, we can really kind of learn more and become better leaders. And it makes us open to fresh ideas. 2, listening shows that you care, right? This whole notion of rapport is really important. And really listening to someone shows you that you can empathize with them, and you're really caring about their thoughts and their opinions. 3, listening helps you comprehend a situation. When you don't pay attention, you're never going to really fully understand the whole situation. 4, listening helps you better understand your business as well. Listening to your customers is kind of crucial. 5, listening gives you a vision of the reality on the ground, right? The day-to-day reality. You're not going to always be able to see all parts of the organization. So it's really important to kind of listen to your teams, especially when you get into bigger organizations where there's a lot of different silos, and also, you know, different departments, etc. So with that said, you know, we know that listening is important. However, companies are failing, right? Listening has become overlooked in the workplace. If you kind of look at the show of hands at the beginning of this, when I asked you guys, mostly everyone kind of raised their hand when we asked this whole concept of, do you feel like you've been listened to in the corporate world? Studies have shown that 1 in 10 employees say that they do not trust that their leaders would listen if they made a complaint. That's more than 10%. And the result is that employees feel like they're not supported, and that impacts their performance. A further 31% of employees say that their leaders lack empathy and don't show interest in their direct reports. So here's the thing, as a leader, if you don't show empathy, you're seen as selfish. And who wants to follow someone who doesn't care about you? Another stat that I find really interesting, 86% of employees believe that empathy is important in the workplace, right? Yet less than half agree that their colleagues and leaders display empathy. Less than half. And here's the thing, I think it's important as we kind of dig into this conversation with Shed of understanding the difference between listening and active listening and leadership. So really quick, we always do kind of like a quick kind of survey. For those who are kind of watching on live stream, you can just answer in the comments. For those who are in the live Zoom audience, I want you to kind of answer this in the chat. Don't press send till I tell you. In your experience in the workforce, would you say that managers, leaders of companies that you've worked for, have the leaders been actively listening to their employees? Are they good at listening? With 1 being not so good, 10 being they listen very well. So if you could kind of rate your previous managers, leaders, companies that you've worked for, how good their listening skills have been to their like employees. 1 being not great, 10 being the best. Type it in the comments. I'm going to count down. We're going to press send at the same time. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 5. Okay, I'm seeing 6, 8. Haven't seen a 10 yet. Got an 8. That's pretty good. 5, 7, And I'm looking at the live streams, and I think the average is about 6 to 5, which is pretty sad. And I didn't see, unless, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think I saw any 10s, not many 9s. And they were, the highest was probably 8, but I think the median was around 6. So kind of seems like we're not doing that great when it comes to really listening, right? Let me find Shed. Shed, are you still around? Let me try to find you so I can pin you.
I'm here.
There you are. There, yeah. Okay. I'm gonna add you pin. Hey, Shed, how's it going? So I'm so excited to introduce today's guest, Stephen Schadletsky. I'm gonna just call him Shed just because it's a lot easier. Shed is a speaker, a thought leader, executive, coach, and advisor. He supports humble leaders who know that they are part of the problem they experience, but also part of the solution that they create. They put their people and purpose first. So feeling stifled on his corporate track, Shed was introduced to Simon Sinek's work and was immediately inspired by it. In 2010, he became the 4th person to join Simon's team. He began answering fan email and became the first person outside of Simon to lead his social media efforts. He moved on to become the chief of staff and then the head of brand experience training and development, leading a global team of speakers and facilitators at Simon Sinek Inc. Stephen ensured that the team's culture, product, and communication authentically reflected the organization's most deeply held values and belief. In addition, Stephen has led hundreds of keynote presentations, workshops, and leadership development programs, though he still works to share Simon's message, helping to create more inspired, safe, and fulfilled worlds. He's also advanced his own personal thought leadership on culture and psychological safety through keynotes, writing, coaching, and advising. So in his practice, Stephen has worked with leaders and organizations around the world to serve clients in any industry where human beings work. He's a graduate of Richard Ivey School of Business, focused on leadership and communication and strategy. And he is also a trained coach through the Coaches Training Institute. He lives in Toronto with his wife and 2 young children. Shed, so excited to have you here. First question I have for you. What is speak up culture? What does that even mean?
Thank you. And hi, everyone. I'm looking forward to making this very interactive with all of you. If it's advertised as a speak up session, it'd kind of be awkward if we didn't hear your voice. So really want to hear all of your voices. Also, my most important direct report, my eldest daughter, is right next to us. So if we have any interruptions, you know why. She's currently being supervised by the 3rd parent, aka the iPad. Delighted to be here with you, Lan. And I mean, a speak up culture is, I view psychological safety as the input to get us a speak up culture as an output. So, well, what is psychological safety? Psychological safety is an environment where we feel that our voice is welcome, where we can show up and share completely. We can share our ideas, we can share our concerns, we can even share our disagreements, and it's rewarded. And when it's rewarded, we're all the more likely to do it again and again. Not just us, but others view that the behavior of sharing our voice, sharing our opinion is rewarded. So other people are more likely to do it. The benefit of that is we have a better understanding of what's actually happening in our organizations, and those with authority can help remove obstacles and make decisions happen. As soon as we repeatedly ignore, or worse, punish people for sharing their ideas, concerns, or disagreements, we bring to life another great quote, Lan, from Andy Stanley, which is, leaders who do not listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say, which is the kiss of death. So a speak up culture is one that when we have psychological safety, our voice is welcome, it's seen as valuable input, which it is. Because the more junior we are in an organization, we're typically closer to where the information and the things are actually happening. And yeah, we create this environment where we're rewarded for speaking up. If we are punished for speaking up, we will soon miss on opportunity, on opportunities to improve things. There can even be failure, or in its most extreme cases, disaster. And we have documented speak up issues from the Challenger disaster at NASA, as well as the Boeing 737 MAX 8, where 346 people have died because 2 planes went down, a documented speak up culture issue. And we need not be in aerospace or, in heart surgery that our work has a life or death impact. We know, Lan, that from Gallup reports, our relationship with our direct boss has more of an impact on our health than that of our relationship with the family doctor. And I have one of those in my family, and I'm very comfortable saying that. So whether or not you're in a life or death industry, leadership is either a life-giving or life-depleting job.
I love that. And so I think you gave a really kind of clear picture of what speak up culture is. How do we actually create one? I guess first, top down, but how about bottom up? Because how do we kind of create that when we don't have power? But then at the same time, I think your approach is like it has to be from the top. But like if you approached it both ways.
Yeah, so there's 2 ways to change an organization. There's top down or bottom up. Top down is an evolution. Bottom up is a revolution. Revolutions are typically more violent, aggressive, and oftentimes less successful. But even if it's still an evolution, even if it's top down, I mean, I see, raise your hand if you yourself are a manager or a manager. Anyone here? Like all of us. And I've seen so many comments out there in the LinkedIn sphere and publications, just like lambasting management. That's not leadership, that's management. Well, I have news for you. We need managers. We need managers a lot. They make things work. What we don't need are drivers, right? There's a leader, there's a driver. A driver is someone who views people as cogs in a machine. People are parts to be used. If your brakes wear out on your car, do you mourn your brakes? No, you buy new brakes. That's a driver. They just view people as replaceable entities, which they are not. That is inhumane. Leaders view their people as what they actually are, and their organizations and teams as what they actually are, living and breathing organisms. An organization is not bricks, mortar, or the cloud. It is always made up of human beings, of people. It's why I also don't like human capital or human resources. How about just humans, right? Head count, how about heart count? It's a lot harder to lay off a heart than it is a head. And so I think a big realization is even if you have senior leaders who want to create this change, it still takes the middle to make it happen. And middle managers have multi-directional power. They can influence up, they can influence side to side, and they can influence down. And so to make a speak up culture truly happen, first and foremost, by all means, leaders ought to go first. And it's typically the first question I get, Lam, when I speak about this, which is, great. I'm on board, but my people aren't speaking up and telling me what's going on. Well, it's like, well, are you leading? Are you going to them? Are you asking them? Are you genuinely caring to hear what the answers are? Are you not freaking out or punishing them when you get answers that are inconvenient and you don't like to hear? Are you modeling the behavior that you wish to see? And are you even going first? For example, if you want feedback and you're not getting it, out yourself. Say, hey, I'm not getting feedback, but if I were to get any, here's the feedback I'd give myself. Am I doing it right or okay? Let me know. And so leaders absolutely do need to go first. I'll share one quick example of this because culture can shift based on the leaders that are in power. And power is defined as having possession over desired resources. It's not necessarily title. So there's a story that my colleague Simon Sinek writes about in The Infinite Game that's brilliant. It tells the story of when Alan Mulally, who became the CEO of Ford Motor Company in the early 2000s, and Mulally was taking over for quite a command and control leader, Lan. This type of person that if you spoke up and said the wrong thing, or you gave a red on your project status report as opposed to a green, all of a sudden, like Dr. Evil at a table, you would just disappear and you would be gone the next week. And so the message was good news only. This is also known as toxic positivity, where we're only allowed to talk about the future and only allowed to talk about good things. Well, that's not human. Like, stuff happens, frustration, anger, grief, that's normal. And so Mullally took over. In his opening press conference, he was asked what car he drove, and he said a Lexus, because it's the best car on the road. This is the CEO of Ford, as if a call to action. Come on, Ford, clean up your act. At the time, Ford was bleeding money. Their products were far superior. Their balance sheet was awful. And he did his weekly executive team meetings. And the first number of weeks, doing his project status report, he would hear from, all of his direct reports if they needed any help. And every one of them, instead of giving yellows or reds on their project status report, it was all greens, like every week for 3-4 weeks in a row. And Mullally finally said, hey, I have to ask you all. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we're bleeding money as an organization. And so there's absolutely no way that all of your project status reports can be green. It's just not possible. So either your people are lying to you or you're lying to me. Bring me some reds or yellows. Otherwise, we can't improve this thing. And finally, the next week, one person gave one red, saying, this is behind. And Mullally literally stood up, gave them a standing ovation, and said, who can help them? And someone raised their hand and said, I can help. And sure enough, the next week, more people came back with more reds and more reds and more reds, because the behavior of speaking up and actually talking about bad news was rewarded, right? Bad news never gets better with time.
So whenever I talk about purpose, leadership and kindness, authentic leadership, I inevitably get, but fear works. like, how do you explain a Steve Jobs, right? Who, was very based on perfectionism and fear. Like, how do you respond to that?
Fear works for a period of time. I mean, I never met Jobs. I heard that he wasn't the most nurturing individual there was. I think he had vision. I think we can agree on that. I think he worked people tough. I think it was highly competitive. I don't think it was the healthiest environment, but there was vision. What I would say is that fear works for the short term. And I think now more than ever, with the Great Resignation and Great Talent Shuffle, the power is far more in the hands of employees as opposed to employers. And people are moving and voting with their feet. And so though fear does work, it works for a short period of time. And it's like, Lan, a snowmobile works in sand. It just has to work harder, takes more repair, costs more, and you have to replace it quicker. And so fear does work in the short term, but if you intend on building something that will last in the long term and have people not rushing to leave you, but people doing everything they can to stay with you and give you your all, psychological safety works far better. That's like putting a snowmobile in snow as it does belong. A good friend of mine, Rich Davini, who wrote this book here, The Attributes, which is brilliant. He has taught me that inspiration is the wind, but trust is the boat. And so, was it inspiring to work for Jobs? I think so. Maybe at times it wasn't as well. But no matter how inspiring an organization or team is, if you do not have trust and psychological safety, good luck to you. That ship is going to sink.
I love that analogy, in terms of sand versus snow. And so let's go back to kind of the speak up culture. What are the key elements that make up a speak up culture?
Great question. And I see there's also an awesome question here in the comments from Grace, which we'll get to. So I've learned that there's two pieces to a speak up culture. The academic journals call it openness and responsiveness. For me, that's far too passive. I like calling it encourage and reward. So when I envision a speak up culture, or what it's like to speak up, work with me here, people. I see a boxing ring. I've spoken up many times in my career, and every time I've spoken up, it isn't without fear. The sign of a psychologically safe environment is one in which we can have high candor and low fear, right? Candor means an ability to talk about everything and the hard truths. And it's low fear, not no fear, and for anyone who says fearless leader, never met one. There's just no such thing. Leaders feel the fear and are connected to something more important to do something about it. And so every time I've spoken up in a culture or a team or with a client or in a friendship, it's almost as if I'm opening up the strings or the ropes of a boxing ring. And I'm being like, do I do it? Do I do it? Do I do it? I'm doing it. And I open it up and I go into the ring and the light's on me, even if it's a one-on-one conversation or a group conversation, and my heart's beating and I got a thing to say. And the two components are encourage and reward. And it's like a cycle. I actually have a slide for it that I can pull up. The reason that it's a cycle is because each leads to the other. Let's see, Lynn, if I have ability to share screen.
You should be able to.
Awesome. So encourage means that I feel that it is worth the risk, the reputational risk for me to go into the ring and speak up. I feel that a positive outcome will happen here. Even if there is fear, I feel that it will lead to improvement. This is the sign of a healthy relationship, one in which we feel encouraged to bring the hard truth. This is candor. The big piece, though, is that once we do lean in and do the behavior of speaking up, sharing an idea, sharing a concern, or even disagreeing or dissenting, the key piece is it rewarded? Reward doesn't mean, oh, Lan, you're perfect, and we're just going to implement all of your ideas. Encourage means we value the input. And even if we don't make the decision that is your recommendation, we take the time to explain why or why not. So the wonderful thing about reward is it cycles back. And even let's say, Lan, I report to you and I take the risk and share feedback with you or share an idea with you or share a concern. I will then go back to my team and say, it went great. I felt heard, valued and seen, or it went awful. Either it's a bad day or just stay away and don't ever tell Lan what's actually going on in this company because you're only going to get punished for it. So this ripples. So these are the two pieces. Is it encouraged? And then once you do step in and share, is it rewarded? And if it's rewarded, you're all the more likely to keep doing it over and over. And others are able to see the cue to keep doing it as well.
I love that. And we have actually a few questions. Let me open it for some of the folks who are in the live Zoom audience. I think there's a few questions. Let me find one. Grace Brady, do you want to unmute and ask your question, or do you want me to ask it?
Sure, I can ask. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Grace.
Thank you. Hi, Shed. I always struggled with, I'm pretty tough manager. Will Sullivan can probably, look at her.
Want to say hi, Soph? No. Okay.
Uh,
Welcome to the live.
Struggled with, holding my team accountable. Some of them are very sensitive, particularly a younger generation than me. So I tried to encourage and nurture, but there's a fine line when they're not performing and how you hold them accountable, because that is the job. And just would love your insight on that.
Great question, Grace. So I'm a really big fan, rather than accountabilities, I like describing them as agreements. So let's form an agreement. I feel as though accountability is far more one way, whereas agreement is mutual. We agree. I think the most important meeting a manager can have in a week is their one-on-one with their direct report. And I encourage that you schedule it weekly. I also encourage that you don't have more than 5 to 7 direct reports, because that's just too many. I've heard people who have 30 direct reports. Good luck with that. That's called a need for a layer, please. And don't just give your people managers tons of work too. They have a job to actually manage and lead people. And so I suggest booking in one-on-ones once a week, because if you miss 1 week, well, then you'll have another one the next week. But if you schedule them in biweekly and you miss one, now you're having one meeting that's one-on-one with your direct report. Good luck with that. The other thing that I really believe in is, first and foremost, okay, we're sitting down, Grace. It's our one-on-one. I think the very first thing that we do, check in. How are you? What's going on? What's easy? What's not easy? How's your dog? I know they were sick last week, right? Oh my God, people have lives outside of work. Yes, they do. Like, acknowledge that. I've heard of a definition of leadership as asking someone how they're doing and genuinely caring to hear the answer. That's a pretty good definition of leadership. And so once you've established a check-in, and for you to share vulnerably with reason as well, and only share details you want that would be effective and relevant, you then go, great, let's talk about what's on your plate, what's going well, what's not going well, and then form an agreement of what will be accomplished by the next time that you meet. Oh, and by the way, if we get to the next time that you meet and it isn't accomplished, that's an issue. And there shouldn't be a surprise by that point. If there's a surprise, you've failed me. If you do a wonderful job of communicating that something is delayed, there's an obstacle, you don't know how to do it, and I don't show up and help you, that's on me. And so it becomes very clear that if someone is underperforming, like, it's right here. These are things we agreed to. I'm also a really, really, really big believer, and I've trained previous bosses of mine that anytime they assign work to me, they always give me a phone call, because I hate the feeling of being assigned work from multiple directions, multiple people, because sometimes we're in matrix organizations or report to more than one person. Good luck with that. And it would totally trigger me to just be assigned something with no willingness or understanding of, like, okay, you're now telling me this is my second priority of the week. I already have 4 other priorities. Like, how is this going to happen? And so I'm a really big believer that we should form agreements. So I literally trained one of my COOs that I reported into. She would assign me something, and then she would text or call or set up a meeting to talk about the thing that they just assigned to me, to ensure that I could actually do it, as opposed to it just being accountability. Does that help, Grace? I'm seeing some nodding heads, so I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and I think
Totally.
one of the things that was helpful too for me as a manager and as a leader was language. Whereas, I remember someone had started and she had come from the agency world and she was so afraid of making a mistake, and she came to me with like fear in her eyes, and I was like, first, in our group, there's no such thing as mistakes. There's course corrections. So I kind of always gave the analogy of a ship. So sometimes if we're heading in the wrong direction, we just need to shift. So it's not you making a mistake, it's the behavior. Like, how do we fix this, right? And I think people internalize, and especially in cultures of fear, it's personalized. Like, so it's not that you made a mistake, it's you're the failure. And I think removing that emotion from that language, and as a team, using languages where it's like, okay, let's have a course correction, opposed to I made this fatal error, this mistake. How do we kind of create systems and structures to now move forward? So I think it's the language, but also creating systems and structures so that you learn from your mistakes, I think is kind of important. Stan has a really great quote from a song. With fear as my friend, I walk the thin line for you. I love that. What song is that from, Stan? Or if anyone? Oh, you're on mute. Oh, I think he's going to email us. We'll find out. And Will has a really great comment as well. I always worried when my teams did not speak up. The silence told me we had problems. Leaders have to create a safe environment so everyone could speak up without judgment. So that's a good point, Shed. Let's piggyback on that. So let's say you want to create this safe, speak up kind of culture, but your team is silent. As a leader, what do you do?
So if your team is silent, it means that unfortunately you're not yet doing a good enough job. Sorry. So change in a culture occurs across 3 gears: mindsets, actions, and systems. And so you need to create change across one of those 3. So, mindset, there is no outsourcing transformation that has to happen from within. Actions. You then need to act your way to that new thinking. You can't just say it and do nothing about it. And then systems. We have to have systems that actually encourage the change that we wish to see. I find it hilarious, particularly in sales teams, when they say one of our values is collaboration, and we compensate our sales team 100% on commission. That's a broken system. That's just not going to work. Yeah, people collaborate when business is great and everything's hunky-dory, but as soon as there's a challenge, good luck with that one. And so so a couple things. I mean, one, in the virtual Zoom world that we live in, the number of all hands meetings I've sat in, Lan, where executive leaders will go, okay, those are our company updates. Any questions? 3, 2, 1. Great, no questions. Everyone's silent. Everyone's head is nodding. Let's move on. No, pause. Use the chat. Put people into breakout rooms. Like, there are questions. And if you aren't getting any questions, you aren't waiting long enough, or you aren't yet using a good system to have those questions surface and happen. And so for leaders who want to speak up culture, but it's not happening, you unfortunately or fortunately have work to do. And it's hard work, but you have to go to people and say, hey, as opposed to just providing me with qualitative feedback, how about quantitative? You just sat in that meeting. On a scale of 0 to 10, how clear was that presentation? Ooh, Nancy gave a 6. Nancy, are you willing to share more about what about that was a 6 for you? This isn't a punishment. We're talking about improvement. So find other ways to make it happen. Or again, out yourself. If you're looking for feedback and you're not getting it, make it up and then ask people, am I getting it right? Or am I totally off base?
Yeah, and I think some companies, what they do too is they implement other different types of platform, whether they have like Basecamp or Twitter or email, that there's multiple ways that you can communicate it if you might not be comfortable speaking out loud, but having other kind of like, platforms that you can use or ways to kind of communicate.
As long as that's not the only way, right? Like yeah. I could say to my daughter, I really care that you feel a part of this family. In the email attached, kindly click on the link and provide feedback to us via this survey of how we could be a more inclusive family. That's fine. Or I could go to her bedroom, sit in her bed and say, I want to have a conversation with you. How can we be a better family? Yeah. So I think it is both. There's no one way and no one size fits all. And there's tons of these platforms coming up, whether it's Office 5 or Culture Amp or Loopin, there's tons of them. So yeah, that's another way to get feedback as well. And then do something about it.
Tom has a good kind of anecdote. I worked in newspapers a long time ago when no one asked questions at meetings. One publisher thought things were great. There were a group of us editors who would say, we pay these people to ask tough questions. If they're quiet, we are in trouble. And so there's also a question from Jill. I think she's driving, but I'll maybe paraphrase her question. She has a question in regards to how do you develop co-leaders to implement this approach?
Yeah, I can speak.
Yeah, go for it, Jill.
Just to give a little background where I'm at. So I went from corporate America and being frustrated with the lack of psychological safety and companies and organizations that were willing to implement a culture I believed in. So I just decided to do it my way and started my own organization. So as we're building, right, I'm sort of moving from being like solopreneur to having a team and trying to really develop people. And our niche is in a couple of areas. And one of those is buying companies and buying privately held companies, converting them to employee ownership in organizations that have a high number of diverse workers, particularly people of color, and then spending time developing that organization over a period of several years to remove a lot of the barriers that prevent leadership from emerging, right? So at every wage band, looking at how do we develop everybody up and do it safely. I am struggling in this case with my co-founder a little bit, and I was a little bit blindsided where I had said, okay, I need you to manage these few relationships. And he's very technical and we're in a technical field. So I'm going to run into this again, I have no doubt. But I said, I need you to manage these relationships. And then things kind of circled back to me like, well, these relationships, the people who he was supposed to be managing are coming to me and saying, yeah, this isn't going so well. Like, we're not getting feedback, or we're not getting direction. We don't feel, I'll just lump it and say, we don't feel safe and enough to really express ourselves. And when I went back to him and said, I asked you to manage the relationship, and this is what it means to me, he said, well, managing a relationship has this like underlying meaning that there's going to be consequences. And I was like, well, yes, that's how relationships work. So I guess that's a long way of asking the question. I just want to be very careful from the outset and intentional about how we develop our leaders as we bring them on, because there are going to be more technical leaders. And I know this is an analytical brain issue in many cases, and it can be learned. But he was upset with me when I've known him many, many years, and I kind of got upset, and I was like, these are people, and we have to make them feel safe, because they're the innovators of our organization at this point.
Yeah.
I'm just curious how to develop that for him safely. I think he's got a lot of maybe many years of psychological trauma professionally that he's trying to deal with too.
Yep. So I think, Jill, a big thing here is just because someone is senior or highly ambitious or a top performer doesn't necessarily mean that they're cut out for the work of being a leader. It's a total different set of skills and attributes. So I'm writing about this right now. I think we need to better define leadership, select better leaders, and then support leaders better. So first and foremost, if we don't define what leadership is, we're trying to shoot a bullseye without an arrow. So I think we need to define what leadership is. I'll take from my colleague Simon Sinek again, that leaders aren't the ones who are in charge. Leaders are the ones who take care of those in their charge. Leadership is about compassion, care, decisiveness, authenticity. And so I think we need to define, what does it mean to be a leader? Because leadership is not just about being in charge. Once we have a definition, then we should find people who suit the attributes and the qualities of how we describe a leader. We should promote people who aren't just senior or top performers. We should promote people who are also high on trust. And so a good conversation to have with your co-founder is, do you want to be a people leader? Like, do you want to be a people manager? Do you want to do this? Because if not, we need to find someone else who can, or better support you. And the work of becoming a better leader is the most gratifying, fulfilling work there is. Just ask any parent. I mean, any parent, I'm seeing my friend Alejandro here, who's taking himself on as a dad, as I am too. It's a hard job. And it's 24/7, by the way. Sheesh, didn't see that one in the contract, right? Like the decision to become a parent, much like the decision to accept a promotion to become a people leader, that's like an 8-minute decision. Like, that's a really quick one. But the decision and the opportunity to raise a child or to be a great leader, that's the journey of a lifetime.
So
and
kind
so
of
there's
going, so Shed, going back to the whole, like, how do we define leadership? So I actually have looked, and there is not one universal definition of leadership, and leadership will be defined by different things depending on the organization, what country you're from. If you're a despot, your definition of leadership is much different than in a democracy, right? So how do you even define or create a universal definition of leadership?
I don't know if we need a universal one, but you at least need one at your organization.
Yeah.
It might be convenient to have one universally. I would say, again, leaders aren't the ones who are in charge. Leaders are the ones who take care of those in their charge. And the only requisite of being a leader is to have followers. Leaders aren't born. Leaders aren't even made. Leaders are chosen based upon the way that they behave. But absent of a universal definition, I think as leaders in an organization, Jill, I think you ought to define what it means to be a leader. And then just the last point I was going to make here, Lan, is that Harvard did a study that shows that there's on average a 12-year gap between when managers get their first management role and when they receive their first management training, which is the age 30 and 42.
Wow.
So Jill, I think a big one is, do you want to be a leader? Do you know what it means to be a leader here? Do you want to be a leader? Great. Now let's get you support to be a better leader, because it's a constant practice. There are no experts of leadership. There's only students.
Yeah, I really appreciate that insight. Particularly, we started a glossary of terms at the beginning when we chartered the company, and I took for granted that everyone would know what was needed in a leader, but it's great insight. And I think further on the Harvard has a great sort of a side-by-side, and Lan, I can share it with you, of what defines a manager and what defines a leader. It's probably one of the best ones I've ever seen as a side-by-side, but it's fantastic. So thank you. I really appreciate the feedback there. That gave me a lot of insight.
Yeah.
Great, Jill. Thank
So
you.
I guess maybe one of the options is, if your partner doesn't want to do the act of leading, maybe getting a chief of staff or a COO, or, a
Someone
people
who wants
person.
to do it.
Exactly.
And
Because I
someone's
think
good at doing
desire
it.
is important, because like you said, not everyone is meant to be a parent, right? And you have to know your strengths and your weaknesses. And, sometimes technical partners are more there for that part. They might be into the engineering or the building the nuts and bolts of the company. Another question I will leave this anonymous in the chat, is coming from the bottom up. What do we do after getting silenced, retaliated against, and isolated for speaking up? And if it's not possible to change jobs because it's not an ideal time?
Find some friends, find some people within or outside of the organization whose values you align with, and invest in those relationships. I mean, that's Lan. That sounds toxic. That sounds like bullying. That sounds like gaslighting, and it is not healthy. So I hope you're asking for a friend. And I hope that's not your experience, but if it is your experience, I'm very sorry. It should never be anyone's counsel of, whoa, get a new job. Well, that's not realistic for some people, but I would encourage you to find and feed the relationships that actually serve you. If it is not safe to speak up or won't be rewarded, work hard to find those relationships where you are treated well. And you're treated the way that you wish to be treated. I mean, that's an awful situation. I hate to say that I've been there before. And the best thing to do when you are in unhealthy and manipulative relationships is distance and boundaries. So do the best you can. We also know that 70 to 80% of jobs are found through networking, like something like this, and people are willingly sharing out their LinkedIn information and wanting to connect. And I would assume that the people who are here and nodding their heads and participating care about this stuff. And Jill, I so appreciate your vulnerability to say, I wanted to start this thing to, solve the very problem I was experiencing. And now we're creating that same problem for our people. What's going on? Well, turns out no one's perfect, but we can solve it together. So yeah, I mean, that doesn't sound like a healthy situation. I wish I could say, oh, just take the blue pill and everything will get better. Well, that's not possible. I would just encourage you to find and feed the relationships that actually serve you.
And I guess depending on the size of the organization too, if there's opportunities to transfer, if you don't want to leave the company, transfer to another department or another people leader. I know I have had friends who've had horrible experiences, but love the company. And the one move of leaving and going to another department made the world of difference. So, I mean, if that's possible, that might be an option as well.
People don't leave companies or jobs, they leave bosses. So if you can find a different team or a different boss that would actually serve you, go for it.
Exactly. Sarah, you have a really kind of counter comment. Do you want to unmute and ask, or do you want me to read it for you?
Sure, I can. So I know there was a mention about creating that safe space and creating a culture, or having direct reports kind of approach you with sort of this open door policy of transparency is 100% on the manager.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess my perspective is, I think it's the manager's responsibility to create that atmosphere and that environment so that people feel comfortable. But there will always be people who may not feel comfortable for a variety of reasons. And so I see that as a relationship, meaning we each kind of own our own side of it.
Mhm.
So as much as I can create that environment, that person also needs to kind of meet me, even if it's like just 20% of the way, to kind of show up, self-advocate, and sort of speak up for themselves, even in the smallest ways. So for me, just that it's 100% on the manager just didn't ring quite true.
Yeah, I fully agree with everything you just said, Sarah. So I agree with that. I mean, the notion of the open door policy is passive leadership. It assumes that people feel confident to walk through the door. Oh, and by the way, when we're all working on Zoom and Slack, where did all the doors go? I fully agree. And I mean, let's say, Sarah, you and I began to work together and we didn't pick it. Like, I was assigned to be on your team and we don't know each other. Well, we should probably get to know each other. Right. And I'm a really big believer, not of the golden rule, but of the platinum rule, right? Golden rule is do unto others as you would want done unto yourself. Where's the empathy? I love platinum rule, which is do unto others the way they would want done unto themselves, which is we should have a conversation of, hey, Stephen, how do you want to receive feedback? Do you want me to book a meeting? Do you want me to catch you off guard? Do you want me to write you a letter? Like, let's figure out not just this is what works best for me as manager, and I'm not going to flex. Where's the humanity there? I do think we have to form relationships and figure out what works for each of us. So I absolutely agree with everything you just said, Sarah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks for that.
Awesome. And I think Tom Grant has a really great suggestion. I think this was in a response to the earlier question of how do you kind of get employees who are quiet more engaged. And he mentions leaders asking for agenda topics before the meetings. And because it's a good way to kind of guarantee getting feedback during the meeting. And then having one-on-one meetings as well, which I think you mentioned as well, Shed. And then Scott Farley mentions ask each person to bring one item to discuss. I think that's a really great idea. So kind of going back to this whole speak up culture, what role does feedback play? And talking about feedback just now, what role does feedback play in a speak up culture?
I want to call out Tom. You came off mute.
Sure.
Was there more you wanted to add in there before we move on and chat about feedback?
Yeah, for some of that is because I've learned some of the hard way when you're in those high executive meetings that go on forever that you were mentioning, Shed, that cost the company about $8 million and nothing gets done. Sidebar, you tend to be bringing topics from those meetings and push down, and the agenda gets full, and you just got to be smacked out of it. And a term probably to use these days, but you then have to realize, wait a minute, these people, your team are out doing the real work. What are they bringing? And I've fallen that by my career going up and down, just having to remember that and just remind your staff, those you just say, hey, you find me in that again, I know it's my responsibility, but speak up. You have agenda topics. So just something to think about. And it was a great suggestion by Stan Scott, bringing that one item too.
Great. Yeah, there's a brilliant book written by a retired U.S. Navy SEAL, U.S. Navy submarine captain, David Marquet, called Turn the Ship Around, which is brilliant. And his sort of whole thesis is, though it's like a pyramid where you have all the authority at the top of the organization, but so little of the information. And so Marquet became obsessed with moving authority to where the information lives. And I think, Tom, that's a lot of what you're speaking to. Of just because you own the agenda doesn't mean that you should be the one setting it completely. And then, Lan, to your question on the role that feedback can play in a speak up culture. So I'm a really big fan of feedback, and I'm a really big fan of a formula called FBI, which is just fun to say. And the formula is feeling, behavior, impact. And it works for both positive as well as constructive criticism. Because I could say to you, Lan, great job today. And you're like, thanks, but there's nothing you can repeat or know what you did that would earn you the accolade of me saying great job. Or I could say, Lan, I felt so supported and so engaged today, behavior, when you prepared and you so had a great run of show that engaged people. And the impact is I only want to do anything that I can in my power to help support you and the community of 7. Thank you. That's far better than then great job. Similarly, instead of saying, you're so irresponsible, what good does that do? I could say, this is hypothetical, everyone. I could say, Lan, I'm really disappointed. You were late to 3 client meetings last week. And I don't know if I can trust you with what's on your plate right now. Are you okay? This isn't like you. What's up? Right? Feedback isn't opinion, or pardon me, feedback isn't fact, it's opinion. And the purpose of feedback is to open dialogue. And if you have power, know that your feedback bears more weight. So you really must use it to open dialogue as opposed to provide an evaluation and stop the conversation there. Because Lan, you could say, well, I'm struggling with my daughter at home and I need to tell you this, that, and the other, or I have too much on my plate. So feedback ought to open up dialogue as opposed to, assign duty or obligation.
I love that. I think we have maybe time for one more question. Does anyone want to kind of unmute and ask a question? Or Gabriella, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, hi. The question is, how do we address the growth of an evolving multicultural labor force as that marketplace continues to grow, and sort of understand those cultural nuances where certain cultures, as Lance said, may not be as outspoken, and then also the receiver or the one that's sharing the information may not necessarily understand how to engage with that culture?
Yes.
That's a really good question, because not only, let's say, culture, though, I'll add to it as well, like, different abilities, different, what is it, neuro abilities. Yes, exactly. Like, because things have gotten a little bit more complicated, right? How do you kind of account for all of that as a leader?
Brilliant question. And it is part of the messiness of what it means to be human. There's no one right answer here, but what I would say, and I saw someone earlier up in the chat say, like, rules of engagement. So there's an equation for culture that I really believe in and I've been playing with, that I'd be delighted to share with all of you as our last sort of bit of content here. Drum roll, please. Thank you. I know you're also eager to see it. Okay, so here it is. Culture equals values multiplied by behavior, and all of that is to the power of power, meaning the more power you have in a culture, the more that you can influence this. I've seen organizations where leaders have left and new leaders have come in, and the culture has changed because someone in power changes them. Values, we cannot see your values. We can only see your values when they're behaved. And so the strength of a culture is not how wonderful the values look on the walls or on our screensavers when we don't touch our computers for 15 minutes. The strength of a culture is the degree to which we live the values we espouse, which is also why I'm a big fan, Gabriella and all, of articulating our values as action phrases. Like, for example, Enron had values. Enron, which went through a huge accounting scandal, they were, if I'm not mistaken, respect, communication, integrity, and excellence. Gabriella, more excellence this afternoon, please. Okay. Like, what does that mean? Excellence is one of the most meaningless values I've ever heard in my life. How about do more great work? Okay, that's a standard. Respect, treat people as the human beings that they are. Communication, communicate in a way that you're ensure that you're heard and that you hear others. Like, we're getting somewhere. So we need to define the culture. But to your point, we're a diverse species, whether it's gender, sexual orientation, where we live in the world, our family history. In some families, you do not challenge authority. In some cultures, you do not challenge authority. But I think when it comes to an organization, there's a culture of an organization, and we set it and we establish it. Malcolm Gladwell wrote in his book, The Outliers, that there was an increased number of commercial airline accidents in Asian cultures because there's less in the Asian culture. You do not challenge authority, and at most there were co-pilots who would just hint, I think there might be Maybe there's an issue with the wing. Meanwhile, that co-pilot knew that the wing was frozen solid, but it's just not culturally appropriate. Well, I have news for you. That's really bad for an organization because planes were going down. And so they actually had to train that out. And so what I would say is, what is the culture here? How do we want it to work? And then how do we bring people along with that? And if it is unnatural for them, we just give it patience and give it time and say, this is what it means to work here. And this is why we do it. And it's for better results. So perhaps a long-winded answer, Gabriella, but I hope that helps.
Yes. So Shed, one last question before we kind of close up. How can we help you? How can we support what you're doing? We know you're writing a book and we will buy it as soon as it comes out. Do you want to put in the chats or anything like that, where to find you, whether add you on LinkedIn? I know you have your own kind of podcast as well. How can this community help you?
Thank you. That is so kind. I'll drop my LinkedIn in here again. You're very welcome to connect with me. The biggest thing for me is I'm extroverted and I speak to think. So just doing this is really valuable. I would love your feedback because these are the ideas that I'm working on for the book that I'm writing right now. The book is called Speak Up Culture. When leaders truly listen, people step up. And it's supposed to come out in the fall of 2023. So I have some time to play with here. So I would love your feedback on, was this useful? Am I getting somewhere? What am I missing? For me to come and sort of share these ideas out in the wild with you is really valuable for me. I'm reconstructing my website right now, but you are welcome to check it every single day for the next month until it is up. It will be shedinspires.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And you guys know the deal. Folks who are in the live Zoom audience, top right-hand side, put this in gallery mode so you can see everyone. Turn on your videos, turn on your microphones, and we need to be really loud so Stephen's daughter hears him and knows how awesome he is. Big round of applause for Shed. Woo-hoo! Thank you so much, Shed. That was awesome.
Thank you
your daughter,
all.
she has an amazing dad.
I'll be sure to tell her that.
Awesome. Thank
Thanks
you,
all.
everyone. Thanks for coming out. See you at the next one. Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Shed.
Bye, everyone.